I was halfway up the attic stairs when the floorboard under my knee gave a soft, wet sigh like something breathing through a cracked lip. And that was the moment I realized my sister had been lying to me about what she dropped off for Christmas. I'd come home to Ohio on the 23rd, the day the airport is a lawless place full of stressed parents and men in Santa hats pretending they aren't hungover, and I'd promised myself I would be normal this year. No fights, no old grudges dragged up like tinsel from a storage bin. No replaying that last Christmas when Mom cried into the mashed potatoes and my sister Olivia stormed out to smoke in the garage, even though she quit 2 years ago. I'd promised myself I'd keep my head down, help with wrapping, sleep on the old twin bed under the framed poster of the 2002 State Fair, and leave without reopening anything. Then I walked into the house, and there it was, a new latch on the attic door. Shiny brass, screwed into the frame like the attic had become a bank vault sometime since Thanksgiving. Mom acted like it had always been there, which is how she acts when she's decided reality is too exhausting to negotiate. Dad wouldn't meet my eyes and kept busying himself with the same strand of lights on the tree, testing and retesting bulbs like he could fix the past if he just found the dead one. Olivia had arrived before me, just to help out, which in our family is code for she needed to stage manage something. She hugged me too hard, like she was trying to compress a secret back in her ribs, and said the attic was off limits because she'd stored some fragile stuff up there and didn't want Mom tripping over it. Fragile stuff. In the attic. In December. In the same attic where we used to keep our Christmas boxes and Dad's old uniforms and the cardboard coffin of a fake pine tree that shed needles like dandruff. The whole thing should have been nothing, except my childhood brain still knew the map of this house. And the attic had never been anyone's territory. It was just space. Dust. A place where you forgot things until you needed them. So when Mom asked me to grab the extra stockings and the gold star, and I went to the hall closet and found it empty, and then Dad suggested maybe Olivia had moved some things around, my promise to be normal snapped the way a cheap ornament snaps when it hits tile. I waited until everyone was distracted with dinner prep, the kitchen full of boiling and clanging and the tense cheer of people pretending to be a family, and I tried the attic door. It was locked. Not a hook-and-eye lock, not one of those little sliding latches, but a real keyed lock. I stood there with my hand on it, feeling stupidly betrayed by hardware, and I told myself to let it go. Then I remembered Olivia's text from 2 days ago, the one she deleted before I could screenshot it, the one that said, "I'm bringing something to Mom's. Don't freak out." And I remember the way she'd said fragile, like it meant alive. I found a spare key ring in the junk drawer like I always used to, and sure enough, the attic key was there on a little red tag that said storage, which was hilarious in a way that wasn't funny at all. I told myself I was just getting stockings. I told myself it was my house too, at least a version of it that lived in my head. I told myself I wasn't going to start a fight. I unlocked the attic door and pulled it down, and the air that slid out was colder than the hallway. Not just stale, but chilled, like the attic had been holding on to winter all day. I climbed the steps quietly, the way you climb when you're trying not to get caught doing something you can't justify, and the higher I got, the more it smelled like pine and something sweet underneath, not cinnamon or cookies, but that artificial sweetness you get walking past certain candle stores like sugar trying too hard. At the top, the attic light was already on. That was the first thing that made my stomach sink because none of us ever left that light on. The second thing was the sound. Not a thump or a creak, but a kind of intermittent scrape, a slow drag that paused and resumed like someone shifting a heavy box an inch at a time. I stood there, half in the hatch, half out, heart doing that stupid rabbit thing, telling myself it was a mouse or a loose vent flap or a box settling. Then I saw the Christmas boxes, all of them stacked neatly along the far wall like a retail display. Labels facing out in Olivia's handwriting. Stockings. Ornaments glass. Outdoor lights. Tree topper. It was too neat, too intentional, and that's when I noticed the space in the middle of the attic had been cleared. The cleared space wasn't empty. It held a huge cardboard box I didn't recognize, taller than my chest, wrapped with packing tape and clean bands, and stuck to the front was a shipping label from someplace in Indiana with the kind of printed barcode you could scan at the post office. On top of the box sat a Santa hat like someone had placed it there as a joke. I took one step toward it, and the scrape sound stopped. I froze. My brain did that thing it does when it wants to be brave and rational at the same time, assembling explanations faster than I could believe them. Maybe it was a motorized decoration. Maybe Olivia bought one of those life-size animatronic Santas. Maybe it was a big ceramic thing that shifted when the heat kicked on. I told myself all I had to do was grab the stockings and leave. But my eyes kept going back to the box, to the way the packing tape wasn't just sealing it but crisscrossing like someone had been afraid of it opening, and to the scent that was stronger near it, sweet and chemical like fake evergreen and something mass beneath. The attic was quiet enough that I could hear my own breath and, faintly, the muffled clatter of Mom in the kitchen below. I forced myself to turn toward the wall of boxes, and I found the one labeled stockings, and when I lifted the lid my hands came away with glitter, the kind that never leaves your skin until you die. Under the stockings was the gold star, and under there were old photos I hadn't seen in years, the kind Mom tosses into bins and forgets, and I shouldn't have cared, but right there on top was a Polaroid from the last Christmas before my brother Ethan disappeared. It was him in the doorway in a stupid sweater, half smiling like he didn't fully want to be in the picture, Olivia's hand visible in the corner holding the camera. Seeing his face hit me like cold water, and I felt that familiar anger flare up, the kind I tried to package away with adult life and therapy and distance. My throat tightened, and I shut the lid too hard, and the noise echoed in the attic like a door slam. The scrape started again, closer this time, and I turned before I could stop myself. The big box had shifted, just slightly, like it had leaned toward me. The Santa hat slid a fraction of an inch and stopped. I stood there staring at it, my mind doing everything except accept what my body already knew. I told myself boxes don't lean. I told myself tape can settle. I told myself I was tired and emotional and looking for reasons to be mad at Olivia. Then, from inside the box, I heard a sound I will never be able to unhear. A slow exhale, deliberate like someone trying not to make noise, and then a soft, steady tapping from the inside. Not frantic, but patient like a code. I backed up until my heel hit a rafter, and pain shot up my leg, and I realized my hand was shaking so hard the stockings were sliding out of the bin. My first thought wasn't ghosts or monsters or anything cinematic. My first thought was that Olivia had done something criminal, something catastrophically real, and that whatever was in that box was the reason Dad couldn't look at me, and Mom was acting like the attic had always been locked. I didn't open it. I didn't call out. I didn't do anything brave. I just stood there, listening to the tapping, while downstairs someone turned on Christmas music and the first notes of a cheerful carol floated up through the floorboards like a cruel joke. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket with a text, and when I fumbled it out, I saw Olivia's name in one line. Don't go in the attic. Please. I didn't answer Olivia's text, which felt like an answer all by itself, and I stayed frozen at the top of the attic stairs long enough that my legs started to ache in that deep, trembling way that tells you fear is burning through whatever adrenaline you had. The tapping inside the box stopped the moment my phone buzzed, which somehow made it worse, like whatever was in there could hear vibrations through cardboard and tape and air. I backed down the stairs slowly, easing the hatch closed with the kind of care you use when you don't want a sleeping child to wake up. I locked the door again, my hands fumbling with the key like I was underwater. As soon as my feet hit the hallway carpet, the house snapped back into its normal volume. The smell of roasted vegetables and butter, Bing Crosby crooning about white Christmases that never actually happen in Ohio anymore, Mom laughing too loud at something Dad said. I stood there for a second, leaning against the wall, trying to decide whether I was about to ruin Christmas Eve or become complicit in something I didn't yet understand. The stockings were still clutched in my hand, glitter dusting the sleeve of my sweater like evidence. I went back into the kitchen and handed them to Mom, and she smiled at me with that tired, grateful look that always makes me feel 8 years old again. And I almost said something right then. Almost. But then Olivia walked in from the garage, cheeks red from the cold or from something else, and our eyes met, and there was a silent exchange there that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. She knew I'd been up there. I knew she knew. She didn't ask. She just nodded, barely perceptible, like she was thanking me for not screaming. Dinner happened in a blur, the kind of family meal where everyone performs their assigned role, so well it's hard to see the strain underneath unless you know exactly where to look. Dad carved the chicken with unnecessary precision. Mom talked about the neighbor's inflatable reindeer. Olivia picked at her food and kept checking her phone under the table. I kept seeing the box every time I blinked, the way it leaned, the patience of the tapping, and once when someone laughed, I swear I heard an echo of that sound in my head. After we cleared the dishes, Mom insisted on hot chocolate and a movie, because tradition is her favorite shield, and we all sat on the couch, pretending to watch something festive while my thoughts spiraled. My phone buzzed again, and this time I checked it immediately. Olivia had texted, "I told you not to freak out. It's not what you think." I stared at those words until they lost meaning. Not what I think could mean 100 things, and none of them were good. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on one sentence that felt like a test. What is in the attic? The typing dots appeared almost instantly, then disappeared, then reappeared, stretching my nerves thinner with every pulse. When a reply finally came, it was longer than I expected and somehow said nothing at all. It's something that needs to stay there until after Christmas. Please. For Mom. That was the moment the anger really kicked in, not hot and explosive, but cold and steady, the kind that sharpens your focus. Ethan had vanished 2 days after Christmas 5 years ago, and ever since then, everything in this house had been organized around for Mom, around not upsetting her, around cushioning her from the truth of whatever had happened to her son. We'd let police investigations fade. We'd let theories calcify into silence. We'd let Olivia take control in ways that felt helpful at first, and then slowly became suffocating. And now there was a box in the attic that breathed. I didn't respond. I watched the rest of the movie without seeing it. And when Mom yawned and said we should all get some sleep because Christmas Eve was a big day, I almost laughed at the absurdity of the phrase. In my old bedroom, I lay awake listening to the house settle, every creak magnified, every gust of wind against the siding sounding like movement where there shouldn't be any. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hall, light and careful, and I knew without seeing her that it was Olivia. I waited, counting my breaths, as she stopped outside my door. She didn't knock. She didn't text. After a long minute, her footsteps retreated, and a few seconds later, I heard the faintest sound from above, a dull thud like something being adjusted, followed by a whisper of movement that traveled through the ceiling joists and into my bones. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and that was when I noticed the smell again, stronger now, seeping into my room through the vents, that artificial pine sweetness layered over something else, something organic and wrong, like a memory you don't want to touch. I grabbed my phone and opened my photos, scrolling back through years until I found the last picture of Ethan I had, taken that same Christmas 5 years ago, and I compared it to the Polaroid I'd seen in the attic. They were the same sweater, the same doorway, the same half-smile. I stared at that image until my eyes burned, and a thought formed that I didn't want but couldn't stop. Whatever Olivia had brought home for Christmas, it had something to do with the brother we'd never buried. Then, from somewhere above my ceiling, I felt rather than heard a slow, deliberate knock, 3 taps in a row, as if someone had learned the layout of the house and was practicing patience. I didn't sleep after that. Not really, just drifted in and out of a shallow, twitchy half-state where every sound snapped me back to alertness, and by the time pale winter light started pushing through the curtains, I felt like I'd been awake for days. The house was quiet in that fragile early Christmas Eve morning way, when it feels like everyone is holding their breath to keep the day intact. I lay there staring at the ceiling, tracing the faint water stain that had been there since high school, and tried to convince myself that the knocking had been a dream layered over old grief and new paranoia. Then I heard it again, softer this time, a single tap that traveled through the vent like a finger against glass, and my chest tightened with a certainty I couldn't logic away. I got up, pulled on yesterday's clothes, and crept into the hallway, every step measured. Olivia's door was closed. Mom and Dad's door was closed. The attic door sat at the end of the hall like it always had, except now I noticed the scuff marks near the frame, the way the carpet fibers were crushed as if someone had been standing there a lot. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I already knew what I needed to do next, and that was talk to Olivia before the rest of the house woke up and the day's obligations made everything harder. I knocked on her door once, then again when there was no answer, and finally tried the handle. Locked. That alone would have been unremarkable if not for the fact that Olivia never locked her door in this house. Not even when she was a teenager and privacy had been her favorite hill to die on. I leaned in close and listened, and through the door I heard movement, not footsteps but a soft, continuous sound like fabric being dragged. I whispered her name, barely audible, and there was a pause, then a low shuffling that moved away from the door. When she finally opened it, she looked like she hadn't slept either, eyes rimmed red, hair pulled back too tight, jaw set in that way that meant she'd already decided what the conversation was going to be, and it didn't include my input. She stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind her, blocking my view of whatever was inside, and for a second we just stood there, siblings in our childhood home, surrounded by ghosts. She told me, in a rush, that I needed to trust her, that she had everything under control, that this was the last thing she wanted to explain right now. I didn't let her finish. I told her I'd heard it. I told her it breathed. I told her it knocked. Her face changed at that. Not surprise, but resignation, like she'd been waiting for this moment since she loaded the box in her car. She said my name the way she used to when we were kids, and she was about to ask me to lie for her, and I felt something in me harden. I asked her if Mom knew. She said no, and then quickly added that Mom couldn't know. Not yet, not today. I asked her if Dad knew. She hesitated just long enough, and that told me everything. I asked her if it was Ethan. She didn't answer, and in that silence I felt 5 years of unanswered questions collapse into something awful and tangible. She finally said it wasn't exactly him, which is one of those phrases that sounds meaningless until you realize how much work it's doing to avoid a truth. She said she'd found him. She said she'd spent years not knowing where to look, and then one day knowing exactly where to look and wishing she hadn't. She said she brought him home because Christmas mattered to Mom and because she couldn't stand the idea of him being alone wherever he was anymore. She said he couldn't stay here long, just through Christmas, just until she figured out what to do next. I asked her what she meant by him, and she told me that it was complicated, that something had gone wrong, that he wasn't the same as he'd been when he left. I asked her what had gone wrong, and she looked at the attic door like it might hear its name and said she'd explain later. I told her there was no later. The house creaked, as if agreeing with me. From above us came a soft, impatient thump, followed by 2 slower ones, like a response to being talked about. Olivia flinched, just a little, and in that moment any illusion she had of control evaporated. She grabbed my arm and begged me, to give her the day, to let Mom have one normal Christmas morning, to let her handle it. I should have walked away. I should have told her she was out of her mind. Instead, I looked at the photos on the wall, at the framed school pictures of Ethan frozen at different ages, and I felt that familiar pull to protect the fragile piece of this house at any cost. I told her I wouldn't say anything today. Relief flooded her face so fast it scared me. She thanked me and disappeared back into her room, locking the door again. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the attic door, listening to the faint movement above, and I made myself a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. If whatever was up there so much as hinted at hurting Mom or Dad, I would tear the whole thing open myself. Downstairs, Mom called out that it was Christmas Eve and we were late starting breakfast, and her voice was so bright and hopeful it felt like a knife. As I went down the stairs to join her, I felt 3 slow knocks echo through the house one last time, spaced like a question, and I knew the day was already broken. Christmas Eve unfolded the way disasters often do, disguised as normalcy. Every small tradition executed with almost aggressive cheer, as if enthusiasm alone could keep the house from noticing what was pressing down on it from above. Mom insisted on pancakes shaped like snowmen, the same way she had when we were kids, and Dad put on the old vinyl records that crackle between carols. And for a few hours I could almost pretend we were just a family navigating grief instead of one actively containing it. Olivia barely left the kitchen, hovering like she was afraid to lose sight of the stove or the hallway. And every time someone laughed too loudly she flinched, eyes darting toward the ceiling. The smell followed us everywhere, faint but persistent, artificial pine layered over something damp and metallic, like old pennies, and I found myself opening windows under the excuse of smoke even though nothing was burning. Mom commented on the cold, joked about heating bills, and pulled her cardigan tighter, and I wondered how much she could sense without admitting it. Around noon, the first knock came from the attic, louder than before, a single solid thud that rattled a picture frame in the hall. Dad paused mid-sentence and glanced up, brows knitting, and for a heartbeat I thought it was over, that the secret would spill out into the open right there between Sugar Bowl and the newspaper. Olivia laughed too fast and said it was probably the wind, even though there wasn't any, and Mom accepted that explanation with visible relief, nodding like she'd been offered a lifeline. The knock didn't come again for a while, and the tension settled into something heavy and exhausting, like waiting out a storm you can't see. In the afternoon, Dad suggested a quick run to the store for last-minute groceries, and I volunteered immediately, desperate for air that didn't smell like lies. Olivia insisted on coming too, which felt less like help and more like supervision. In the car, the silence stretched until it felt physical, the familiar roads sliding by outside the windows, decorated with lights and inflatable Santas that felt mocking in their abundance. She finally spoke, not looking at me, and said she hadn't meant for me to find out like that. She said she thought she had more time. I asked her how long he'd been like that, and she said she didn't know how to measure it anymore. She told me she'd found him in a place she couldn't explain without sounding insane, and that whatever had happened to him wasn't exactly an injury or an illness, but a kind of delay. She said time hadn't moved the same way for him, and that when she found him, he still thought it was Christmas. She said she couldn't leave him there, not when he kept asking about Mom. The road blurred a little as my eyes filled, anger and grief tangling together until I couldn't tell which was which. I asked her if he was dangerous. She hesitated, then said he was unpredictable, which is the kind of answer you give when the truth is worse. She told me the box was reinforced, that she'd researched it, that she'd done everything she could to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone. I asked her if she'd called the police, or a doctor, or anyone, and she shook her head, jaw tight, and said some problems don't survive being shared. When we got back to the house, Dad was on the ladder outside, stringing lights, humming to himself, and for a moment I saw how easy it would be for everything to go wrong with one slip, one distraction. Inside, Mom was wrapping presents at the table, paper and tape everywhere, and she'd saved the last one for Ethan, the way she always did, labeling in her careful handwriting even though it never went under the tree. Seeing that gift broke something in me. The knocking resumed as evening fell, more frequent now, a pattern emerging that I couldn't ignore, 3 quick taps followed by a pause, then 2 slower ones, over and over like someone practicing a memory. Olivia started slipping upstairs every hour, claiming she needed the bathroom or forgot something in her room, and each time she came back paler, more frantic. I caught her once at the attic door, hand on the lock, whispering reassurance through the wood like a prayer. She told me he was getting agitated, that he could hear us moving around, that the music upset him. She turned off the record player, and the house fell into an unnatural quiet, broken only by the muffled tapping above us. Mom noticed the silence and asked why the music had stopped, and Olivia said the needle was scratched, and Mom frowned but let it go. As night settled in, snow started to fall, fat flakes that blurred the streetlights and made the world outside feel sealed off. Dad lit the fireplace, and the warmth pushed the smell through the house in waves, making my stomach turn. I stood in the living room watching the tree lights blink on and off, thinking about the box in the attic, about the brother I loved and the thing that was wearing his patience like a skin, and I realized with a sinking certainty that whatever Olivia had planned, it wasn't going to hold through Christmas morning. Above us, the tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a slow, dragging sound that moved from one end of the attic to the other, testing the limits of its containment. And from somewhere deep in the house, Mom called out, confused, asking if someone was moving furniture upstairs. I told Mom it was just the pipes, because that's what you say when the truth is too big and too sharp to hand to someone who's already bleeding, and she accepted it with a tired nod that felt like consent. The dragging sound above us continued, slow and deliberate, the kind of noise that suggests intent rather than accident, and I watched Dad's shoulders tense as he poked at the fire, pretending not to hear it. Olivia shot me a look that was half gratitude, half warning, and then excused herself again, disappearing upstairs with the brittle determination of someone trying to outrun a clock. I followed a few minutes later, unable to sit with the waiting any longer, my heart pounding in time with the muted sounds above. In the hallway, the attic door seemed to hum with contained energy, the lock vibrating faintly under my fingertips when I placed my hand against it. I could feel the movement through the wood now, not just hear it, a subtle pressure that came and went like breathing. Olivia was already up there, I realized, because I could hear her voice, low and urgent, bleeding through the door as a vibration more than words. She was telling him to calm down, to remember, to wait. I knocked softly and whispered her name, and for a moment there was nothing, then the dragging stopped. She cracked the door just enough to slip out, closing it behind her with exaggerated care, and I saw in her face that whatever she'd been doing wasn't working anymore. She told me he was getting confused, that he thought it was Christmas morning already, that he kept asking why Mom hadn't come up yet. The way she said Mom made my chest ache. I asked her what he would do if he got out. She didn't answer directly, just said we needed to keep him contained through the night, that she'd reinforced the box again, added more tape, weighted it down with the old trunk of photo albums. I asked her how you reinforce cardboard against someone who can move like that, and she snapped at me, the fear finally breaking through her control, telling me she'd done her research, that the materials mattered, that belief mattered, that he was still Ethan in some essential way and wouldn't hurt us if we didn't frighten him. Downstairs, Mom called us to help with cookies, and Olivia plastered on a smile and went, leaving me alone in the hall with the attic door and the knowledge that we were improvising a solution to something that had no right answer. I stood there longer than I should have, my palm pressed flat against the wood, feeling the faint warmth beneath it that shouldn't have been there in an unheated attic. Against my better judgment, I leaned in close and whispered his name, just once a test I hadn't planned. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, from the other side of the door, there came a soft sound that was unmistakably a response, a low, familiar hum he used to make when he was thinking, followed by a single, careful knock directly opposite where my hand rested. My breath hitched, and tears stung my eyes, grief and hope tangling into something unbearable. I stumbled back as Olivia returned, her eyes widening when she saw my face, and I shook my head, unable to put into words what had just happened. We went back downstairs and finished baking cookies we didn't want, frosting them with forced cheer while the knocking above settled into a steady, almost polite rhythm that threaded through the house like a countdown. After dinner, Dad announced he was turning in early, claiming a headache, and Mom followed soon after, exhausted from the day. Olivia and I were left alone in the living room, the tree lights reflecting off the windows, the snow outside thickening until the world felt very far away. She told me she planned to leave early Christmas morning, before Mom woke up, to take him somewhere safer, somewhere better equipped. I asked her where, and she said she didn't know yet, which felt like the final crack in a dam. As midnight approached, the knocking grew faster, the pattern breaking down into something more frantic, and the dragging resumed with more force, rattling the attic floorboards. Olivia stood, panic rising, and said she needed to check the tape again. I followed her despite her protest, my nerves screaming that this was the moment everything tipped. At the attic door, the lock was warm to the touch now, and the wood bowed inward slightly between knocks. Olivia fumbled with the key, hands shaking, and as she slid into the lock, there was a sudden, violent thud from the other side that made us both jump back. Dust shook loose from the ceiling, and from inside the attic came a sound that wasn't knocking anymore, but laughter, soft and delighted, like someone who knew a secret and was about to share it. The laughter cut through me in a way the knocking never had, because it was unmistakably his, that same breathy, almost embarrassed sound Ethan used to make when he thought something was funny, but wasn't sure anyone else would agree. Olivia froze with the key half-turned, her face draining of color as if the sound had reached inside and switched something off. For a split second, neither of us moved, and in that stillness I understood how dangerous hope can be, how quickly it makes you forget everything you know. The laughter faded into a low murmur, words I couldn't quite make out bleeding through the door like a radio tuned just off station, and the attic floor creaked under a slow, deliberate shift of weight. Olivia whispered that this wasn't supposed to happen yet, that he wasn't supposed to be this aware, and I realized she was as much in the dark now as I was. She tried to turn the key back, to retreat, but the lock resisted, jammed by the pressure from the other side, and panic flared in her eyes. I told her to stop, to step away, because every instinct I had was screaming that opening that door was a line we couldn't uncross. She shook her head, tears spilling over, and said he was scared, that he didn't understand why he was alone in the dark, that if we didn't reassure him he would break through anyway. Another thud shook the frame, harder than before, and the laughter returned, louder now, threaded with something else, a strain that made my skin prickle. From downstairs, a floorboard creaked as someone shifted in their sleep, and the thought of Mom waking up to this, of her standing in the hallway confronted with whatever was about to emerge, filled me with a cold, protective fury. I grabbed Olivia's wrist and pulled her back, my voice low and urgent, telling her we needed to leave it locked, that we needed to get Dad, to get help, to stop pretending this was something we could manage between the two of us. She wrenched free and slammed her palm against the door, begging him to calm down, to remember Christmas mornings and pancakes and Mom singing. And for a heartbeat the movement on the other side slowed. The pressure eased just enough for the lock to settle, the wood creaking as if relieved. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then, very softly, from the other side of the door, came a voice, hoarse and careful, speaking my name for the first time in 5 years, and whatever resolve I'd built shattered completely. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth as she sobbed, and I felt my knees weaken, grief and longing crashing through me so fast I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The voice said it was cold, that the box hurt, that he didn't like being taped up, and the words were so mundane, so achingly familiar, that my brain scrambled to keep up. He asked if Mom was still mad at him. He asked if it was Christmas yet. Olivia reached for the key again, and this time I didn't stop her. The lock turned with a click that echoed down the hallway like a gunshot, and the attic door creaked inward under its own weight. A blast of cold, sweet air poured out, carrying that wrong smell with it in full force. And in the dim light from the hall I saw the box, or what was left of it, cardboard shredded from the inside, tape hanging in limp ribbons. Something inside shifted, rising with an unsteady grace, and as a familiar silhouette unfolded itself in the shadows, footsteps sounded on the stairs below, quick and confused, and Mom's voice called out, bright with expectation, asking if someone was already up there setting out presents. Time did that strange, stretching thing it does in moments you know you'll replay forever, each second viscous and heavy, as the shape in the attic finished pulling itself upright and the reality of it settled into my bones. It looked like Ethan the way a reflection looks like you in a warped mirror, close enough to recognize, wrong enough to make your stomach twist. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe thinner in a way that made the height more obvious. Limbs a little too long, joints bending with a stiffness that suggested they weren't used the way joints should be. His sweater hung off him like it had been borrowed from a memory, stretched and frayed. And his face, God, his face was so familiar, I almost didn't see what was off at first. His eyes tracked the light from the hallway with an intensity that made me think of an animal adjusting to daylight. And when he smiled, it was slow and deliberate, like he was recalling how smiling worked rather than reacting naturally. Olivia took a step forward, sobbing his name, and he tilted his head, studying her with a concentration that felt invasive, like being examined rather than recognized. He reached out one hand, fingers trembling, and brushed the air between them, as if testing distance. From the stairs below came the unmistakable sound of Mom climbing up, humming softly to herself, and panic slammed into me, so hard it was almost physical. I moved without thinking, stepping between the attic opening and the hallway, my body making a choice my mind hadn't fully caught up to yet. I told Olivia to stop, to think, to remember what she'd said about unpredictability, but she was already lost, her whole being pulled toward the brother she'd spent 5 years trying to find. Ethan, or whatever he was now, turned his attention to me, and I felt that focused gaze settle on my face like a weight. He smiled again, wider this time, and something in that expression made my skin crawl. Not malice exactly, but hunger, an intensity that went beyond reunion. He took a step forward, and the floorboard creaked under his weight, a perfectly normal sound that somehow made everything worse. Mom's voice floated up the stairs, closer now, asking why the attic door was open, her tone light and curious. And I imagined her rounding the corner, seeing him standing there in the dim light, and either breaking away she'd never recover from or running into his arms without hesitation. The thought of either outcome made my chest ache. I reached back and grabbed Olivia's arm, trying to anchor her, and she looked at me with a betrayal so raw it hurt, like I was stealing something she'd already claimed. Ethan's gaze flicked to my hand on her arm, and for the first time his expression shifted, the smile faltering into something tighter, more calculating. The air felt colder, heavier, and I realized the smell had changed too, the artificial pine giving way to something sharper, more animal. He took another step, then another, movements growing surer with each one, like he was remembering how to inhabit his body in real time. Behind me, a floorboard on the stairs creaked loudly as Mom reached the top, and she laughed softly, saying she'd known we were hiding something up here. I felt trapped between a mother about to be reunited with the son she'd mourned and a sister who'd gambled everything on a hope she couldn't control, and I understood with terrifying clarity that whatever choice I made in the next few seconds would destroy what was left of our family. Ethan leaned forward, his breath warm against my cheek as he whispered something I couldn't quite make out, and his hand brushed my shoulder with a pressure that was just a little too strong. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mom's shadow stretch across the hallway wall, reaching the threshold, and I knew there was no more time. I did the only thing I could think of that didn't involve explaining the impossible to my mother or surrendering my sister to a mistake she couldn't take back, and that was put my weight into it and shove Ethan backward as hard as I could. The contact felt wrong immediately, not like pushing a person, but like pressing against something that yielded and resisted at the same time, elastic and dense, and the strength behind his response shocked me. He staggered but didn't fall, boots scraping against the attic floor, and the look he gave me then wasn't confusion or hurt, but something closer to disappointment, as if I'd failed a test he expected me to pass. Olivia screamed my name, furious and terrified, and lunged toward him, but I grabbed her and hauled her back, my heart hammering so loud I could barely hear Mom's footsteps anymore. Ethan straightened slowly, shoulders rolling as if loosening muscles he hadn't used in years, and for the first time, I saw anger cross his face, quick and sharp like a glitch in a familiar image. He took a step forward, and I braced myself, every nerve screaming that if he reached the hallway there would be no undoing what followed. I slammed the attic door shut between us, the impact rattling the frame and sending a shock through my arms, and I threw my weight against it just as he hit from the other side. The force drove the breath from my lungs, and the door bowed inward, with groaning, dust raining down, and Olivia cried out behind me, pounding on my back, begging me to stop. I fumbled for the key, hands slick with sweat, and jammed it into the lock, twisting just as another blow landed, harder than the last. The latch clicked into place with a sound that felt both triumphant and utterly inadequate. Ethan's laughter burst out again on the other side of the door, louder now, edged with frustration, and the sound of him throwing himself against it sent vibrations through the hallway floor. Mom's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with confusion now, asking what on earth was going on. I turned just in time to see her standing there in her robe, eyes wide, taking in the scene with a dawning horror. I didn't give her time to process it. I told her to go back to her room, that everything was fine, that it was just an argument, and the lies sounded thin even to me. She took a step closer instead, gaze flicking from my face to Olivia's tear-streaked one to the attic door shuddering under repeated impacts. And in that moment, I saw understanding bloom in her expression, not of the details, but of the scale of the wrongness. She whispered Ethan's name like a prayer and reached out a hand toward the door, and panic surged through me. I stepped in front of her, blocking her path, my voice breaking as I begged her to trust me just this once, to go downstairs, to let us handle it. Another crash shook the door, splitting the wood along one seam. And from behind it, Ethan's voice rose, no longer careful, calling for Mom with a desperation that clawed at her resolve. She sobbed then, a raw sound that tore through me, and Dad's footsteps thundered up the stairs behind her as he demanded to know what was happening. The house felt too small, the air too thin, and as the door splintered a little more under the relentless blows, I realized with sick certainty that whatever was in the attic was learning fast, and that holding it back with locks and lies wasn't going to last much longer. Dad reached the top of the stairs just as another chunk of wood cracked free from the attic door, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something like terror as the truth announced itself in splinters and sound. He demanded answers, his voice sharp and grounding in a way that almost made me believe we could still pull this back, but then the door bowed again and a hand punched through the weakened panel, fingers splayed and grasping, skin stretched too tight over knuckles that bent the wrong way. Mom screamed and collapsed against the wall, and Olivia dropped to her knees beside her, sobbing apologies that had nowhere to land. Dad froze, staring at the hand like his brain refused to accept the evidence in front of him, and I found myself shouting over the noise, telling him to get Mom downstairs, to call the police, to call anyone, because whatever this was, it wasn't something we could reason with anymore. The word police seemed to snap something into place for Ethan, because the hand withdrew and his voice sharpened on the other side of the door, losing its careful cadence, telling us not to do that, telling us we didn't need anyone else, telling us we were family. The word family came out wrong, stretched and heavy, and it made my stomach drop. Dad hesitated just long enough to show he was still Dad, still trying to understand. And then he scooped Mom up with a strength I hadn't seen in him in years and carried her back down the stairs, her sobs echoing behind them. Olivia looked at me with wild eyes, mascara streaked down her face, and told me this was my fault, that if I hadn't interfered he would have calmed down, he would have understood. I didn't argue, because part of me believed her and another part of me knew understanding wasn't what was happening up there. The door shook again, harder this time, and a crack split the frame, running like a fault line. I could hear him breathing clearly now, fast and wet, punctuated by soft laughs that sounded more like static than joy. Olivia scrambled to her feet and tried to get to the lock, shouting his name, promising him Mom was just tired, promising everything would be okay if he just waited. I grabbed her and dragged her back, my hands shaking, and told her he wasn't listening anymore, that he was learning. The realization hit me then, fully formed and sickening. The box hadn't just been a container, it had been a delay, a cocoon, something that slowed him down while he remembered how to be. Every minute we'd spent pretending this was temporary had been a gift to whatever he was becoming. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, maybe from a neighbor's house, maybe from Dad finally making the call I'd begged for, and the sound seemed to enrage him. The impacts came faster now, rhythmic and brutal, and the doorframe began to give way, nails popping loose one by one. I scanned the hallway desperately, my eyes landing on the old trunk of photo albums Olivia had mentioned, shoved against the wall nearby. I dragged it forward with a grunt and slammed it against the door, adding my weight, bracing myself as another blow sent shockwaves through my arms. Olivia screamed at me to stop, to let her talk to him, but her voice was drowned out by the cracking wood and the rising, animal edge in his laughter. Through the widening gap, I caught a glimpse of his face again, twisted now, eyes too bright, teeth bared in something that wasn't a smile. He said my name one last time, not pleading anymore, but testing it, and then he drove his shoulder into the door with a force that knocked me backward, the trunk skidding across the floor. The attic door hung crooked on its hinges, one final shove away from giving out completely, and as I scrambled to my feet, lungs burning, I understood that whatever came next would define the rest of our lives, if any of us had lives left to define. The door finally gave with a sound like a tree splitting under snow, the hinges tearing free and the whole thing collapsing inward as Ethan surged into the hallway, momentum carrying him farther than he seemed to intend. He hit the opposite wall hard enough to leave a dent, paused there for half a second like he was recalibrating, and then turned back toward us with a look of open confusion that almost broke me. For one impossible heartbeat, he looked like my brother again, scared and overwhelmed, hands shaking at his sides as if he didn't understand his own strength. Olivia cried out and took a step toward him, and this time I didn't stop her because I thought maybe this was the moment, maybe this was where it turned back into something human. He reached for her, and she reached for him, and then, in a way that still feels unreal even as I write this, his hand closed around her forearm and kept going, fingers sinking into flesh with no resistance at all, like she wasn't solid to him anymore. Her scream snapped something in me, and I lunged forward, grabbing a fallen piece of the door without thinking, swinging it hard and wild. It connected with his shoulder, and he barely reacted, just turned toward me slowly, eyes fixing on my face with a clarity that felt earned, like he'd finally figured out who the real obstacle was. That's when the sound downstairs changed, the distant sirens resolving into something immediate and close, red and blue light flashing up the stairwell, and Ethan's head cocked toward us sharply. He let go of Olivia, who collapsed sobbing against the wall, and took a step back toward the attic, expression tightening into something like calculation. I realized then that he didn't want chaos. He wanted access, time, and privacy, the same things Olivia had been trying to give him. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, heavy and coordinated, voices shouting commands that filled the hallway with authority and finality, and Ethan reacted the way an animal does when it knows a trap is closing. He moved fast then, faster than I would have believed possible, retreating past the broken door and into the attic in a blur of motion that sent cold air rushing past us. The officers reached the top of the stairs just as he vanished into the shadows, guns raised, faces pale but determined, and for the first time that night, I felt something like relief. What followed was loud and chaotic and strangely procedural. The attic flooded with light, shouted warnings, a struggle I could hear but not see, ending in a heavy, final thud that seemed to knock the house back into place. They took him away wrapped in something thick and dark that swallowed his shape, and no one said his name out loud. Mom spent Christmas Eve in the hospital under observation, sedated and hollow-eyed, clutching my hand like she was afraid I'd disappear too. Olivia didn't speak at all, just stared at the wall, the weight of what she'd done settling over her in layers. The police asked questions we couldn't answer and wrote reports that felt too small for what had happened, and by the time Christmas morning arrived it felt obscene, a day that no longer belonged to us. The house smells normal again now, or maybe I've just learned to live with the absence of that other scent, and the attic door has been replaced with a solid slab that will never quite hide the cracks in the frame. We don't talk about Ethan in the present tense anymore, and we don't talk about him in the past tense either. Not really. Sometimes, late at night, I still listen for knocking, and sometimes I swear I hear it, slow and patient, like something waiting for another chance. I told myself the knocking was trauma, that the brain fills silence with echoes when it doesn't know how to stop listening, and for a while that explanation worked well enough to let me function. January came and went, then February. The house sold faster than anyone expected, and Mom moved into a small condo near the hospital where she could walk to her appointments and pretend she'd chosen the change. Dad stayed with my aunt for a bit, and then somewhere else, the details blurring the way they do when a marriage doesn't explode so much as quietly disassemble. Olivia disappeared into a legal process that moved in slow, grinding increments, lawyers speaking in careful language about intent and mitigation and untreated grief, and I visited her exactly once, sitting across from her in a room that smelled like disinfectant and regret, neither of us knowing how to talk about a brother who technically existed and absolutely didn't. Spring came early that year, crocuses pushing up through dirty snow like they were proving a point, and by the time summer arrived, I'd convinced myself the worst was over. Then, in late July, I got a call from an unfamiliar number that left a voicemail when I didn't answer, a calm, professional voice asking me to return it regarding a matter connected to my family's December incident. I assumed it was paperwork or testimony or something procedural that had slipped through the cracks, and I didn't call back right away because avoidance had become a skill. The second voicemail came a week later, and this time the tone was different, edged with something I didn't like, and that's when I finally listened to the message all the way through. They'd been reviewing the materials recovered during the containment. They said, and there were discrepancies. They liked to ask me a few clarifying questions about the box. I sat there staring at my phone, heat buzzing under my skin, because no one outside Olivia and me was supposed to know about the box. When I finally met with them, in a windowless room with bad coffee and a table bolted to the floor, they slid a photo across to me without ceremony. It was the shipping label from the box, scuffed but legible, the Indiana return address clear as day. And beneath it was a second photo I hadn't seen before, taken in the attic after the door was breached. In the corner of the frame, half hidden behind the trunk, was another box, smaller, crushed flat like it had been discarded long before we ever went up there. I told them I didn't know what it was, because I truly didn't, and they exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. One of them leaned forward and asked me, gently, if I was certain there had only ever been one. I laughed then, a short, disbelieving sound that felt like it came from somewhere outside my body, and told them, of course, there had only been one, because how could there be more? Because the idea was ridiculous. They didn't laugh with me. They thanked me for my time and said they'd be in touch, and when I walked out into the sunlight, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit on the curb until it passed. That night, in my apartment 3 states away, I lay awake listening to unfamiliar pipes and unfamiliar neighbors and tried to convince myself the knocking I heard was just the building settling. It came in 3s, then 2s, patient as ever. And for the first time since Christmas, I wondered not whether Ethan had survived, but whether we'd ever really found where he'd come from in the first place. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the knocking itself, but because of what it implied, the quiet arithmetic my brain kept doing whether I wanted it to or not. If there had been another box, smaller, crushed, then it meant Olivia hadn't brought Ethan home the way you bring back a lost thing. It meant something had arrived before him, or left after, or never been meant to be noticed at all. I called her lawyer the next morning under the pretense of checking in, and after some careful phrasing and a long pause, he told me Olivia had been asking the same question for weeks now, fixated on details she couldn't account for, timelines that didn't add up no matter how she rearranged them. He said she'd started insisting that Ethan hadn't been alone where she found him, that there had been something else there first, something that taught him how to wait. I hung up and spent the rest of the day spiraling through old memories, replaying that Christmas with a forensic intensity I'd avoided before, and suddenly small details felt louder than they ever had. The way the knocking had changed rhythm after Olivia went up to reinforce the box. The way Ethan's awareness sharpened in stages, like levels unlocking. The way he reacted not with fear, but irritation when the police were mentioned, as if authority itself was an obstacle he'd learned to anticipate. That night, I pulled up the shipping label photo again, zooming in on the return address until the pixels blurred, and something clicked that made my stomach flip. It wasn't a residence. It was a storage facility, one of those anonymous places on the edge of towns where time doesn't really apply to what you leave behind. I searched it obsessively, found old listings, reviews, forum posts buried deep enough that no one expects them to matter, and there was a throwaway comment from years ago about noises, about units that shouldn't have been occupied anymore, about management taping boxes shut instead of opening them, because sometimes it was easier not to look. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, heart racing, because suddenly the question wasn't whether Ethan was still out there, but whether he had ever been the first. I started thinking about the second box, the smaller one, crushed flat, and I realized with a clarity that made me feel sick that something had learned. The knocking that night didn't come from the walls or the ceiling, but from inside my apartment, faint and exploratory, 3 taps followed by 2, echoing softly from the hallway closet I never used. And as I lay there staring at the door, every light on, I understood that containment had never been the point. I didn't open the closet, not that night, or any night after, because some instinct arrived, fully formed, and argue better than reason ever could. The knocking continued for weeks, never loud, never demanding, always careful, always patient, as if whatever was inside understood that attention had to be earned now. I reported it to the building manager, who checked the pipes and shrugged, and to a friend who slept on my couch once and laughed it off until he didn't come back again. Eventually, the knocking stopped, or maybe I stopped reacting to it, and life did what it always does after something unspeakable. It moved on in the most insulting way possible. Olivia took a plea that spared her prison time, but left her permanently monitored, a compromise everyone called mercy and no one looked too closely at. Mom stopped asking questions she didn't want answers to and filled her condo with plants that needed constant care. Dad learned how to cook for one and sent me photos like proof of survival. And Ethan was folded into the category of things we don't clarify, a tragedy with no clean edges, a story that can't be told without someone flinching. Months later, I received one last call, brief and carefully worded, informing me that the facility in Indiana had been cleared out during renovations and that several unregistered containers had been removed without incident. No explanation was offered. No follow-up came. I stood in my kitchen after the call ended, staring at my phone, and realized with a hollow certainty that the silence wasn't reassurance, but selection. The knocking hasn't returned in a long time now, but sometimes, when I'm half asleep or half remembering, I swear I feel a presence not trying to get in, but trying to understand how I live, how long I wait before answering doors, how much noise a human makes when they think they're alone. I've stopped celebrating Christmas altogether, not out of bitterness but caution, because it's a season built on invitations and unlocked rooms and the belief that familiar voices mean safety. If there's anything I've learned from all this, it's that patience is not a passive trait, and that whatever came home with my sister didn't want our house so much as our habits. If you ever hear knocking that feels thoughtful rather than urgent, don't assume it's meant for you. Sometimes it's just practicing.